Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of incredible sources, distill the most potent insights, and really cut through the noise to get straight to what truly matters for you. Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating and often misunderstood realm, the modern theory and practice of magic, specifically as laid out in Peter J. Carroll's foundational text, Liber Null and Psychonaut. Now, this isn't about, smoke and mirrors or traditional spells exactly.
No, it's presented as much more radical, practical, and deeply psychological, an approach into personal power and, well, understanding reality itself.
And what's striking about Carroll, the foreword calls him a third leading theorist of modern Western magic, right up there with Eliphas Levi and Aleister Crowley.
Exactly. But his whole thing is reshaping how we understand magic. He puts it squarely in this ultra-modern or postmodern context, moving away from those rigid traditions.
So our mission today is to unpack this guide. It's about self-transformation, reality manipulation. We want to show you how its core ideas connect with ancient wisdom, but also, surprisingly, with insights from modern science.
Yeah, get ready to challenge your assumptions, really, about what's possible.
Because this deep dive is all about individual agency and the universe as, well, Carroll provocatively calls it a stupendous practical joke.
Which definitely sets a certain tone, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so let's start with that foundational idea. The thing that really sets chaos magic apart. The text defines magic itself as, get this, the raising of the whole individual in perfect balance to the power of infinity.
It's a huge vision, right? Almost cosmic.
Totally. So how does Carroll actually propose someone achieves a state like that? It sounds immense.
Well, that's the critical point. He shifts the focus. It's not about external rituals or praying to deities. Not primarily. Empowerment comes from internal work.
Eternal work, like that.
Meditative exercises to free the subconscious and charge up the will. It's all about developing an internal locus of control. Your own mind, your own will, those are the tools.
Okay, and this leads to one of the most, maybe, startling concepts in the book, the prime cautionary injunction. Nothing is true, which sounds potentially nihilistic. But then he says it applies this even to itself.
Yeah, it creates this loop, what he calls a powerful loop of eclecticism.
Eclecticism. Can you break that down? What does that mean in this context? How does that function for someone trying to practice this?
Sure. So if nothing is true, then there's no fixed dogma, no belief system you have to follow. It completely frees you up.
Frees you up how?
To experiment. With any paradigm, that's his word for, like a dominant worldview, a symbol system, any set of beliefs, as long as it works for your magical goals.
So you can just pick and choose?
Essentially, yes. Eclecticism is that freedom. Pull tools, symbols, ideas from anywhere, ancient myths, modern science, pop culture, whatever, and use them based purely on utility. Does it help you achieve the result?
Okay, and the book actually says the universe will tend to provide confirmation of any paradigm one chooses to live in.
Exactly. Implying this observer-created universe, your belief shapes your reality in a way.
So if we're kind of co-creating reality and belief as a tool, how do you even start harnessing this power? The book lays out a neophyte syllabus of chaos magic. It starts with disciplines of magical trance.
Right, and it begins with things that sound simple but are actually profoundly challenging. Motionlessness and breathing.
Just sitting still and breathing.
Well, yes, but the goal isn't just physical benefit. It's preparation for not thinking. That's the beginnings of the magical trance condition, as he puts it.
Not thinking. Like mindfulness.
Very much related, yeah. Carroll describes the mind as a raging tempest of activity. So winning even a few seconds of mental silence is presented as quite a triumph.
So it's about disciplined attention, vigilance over thoughts.
Exactly. Because the will, magically speaking, becomes effective only when the mind is focused and not interfering with the will. It needs to be a clear channel.
That makes sense. And this disciplined focus, it sounds crucial for avoiding something else the text mentions. Lust of result.
Yes. Lust of result. That's a big one.
Why is that such a critical hurdle? What does it actually mean?
It's when your ego gets too wrapped up in the outcome. Fear of failure or maybe even an over-attachment to succeeding. It basically short-circuits the magic.
How?
Well, the mind, instead of being that clear channel for your will, generates this mass of conflicting ideas. And according to the text, that interference actually destroys the desired outcome.
Interesting. So wanting it too much kills it.
In a sense, yes. It's about letting go of that attachment, which, isn't just magic advice. It pops up in psychology too, achieving flow, success by trusting the process.
Right, releasing control.
Exactly. And this ties into another concept, metamorphosis, a willed restructuring of the mind.
Restructuring the mind. How?
By practicing small changes, deleting minor habits, adopting new, completely arbitrary ones, like deciding to always put your left shoe on first or something equally random.
Arbitrary. What? Or arbitrary.
Because the text insists these choices shouldn't have spiritual, egocentric, or emotional significance. And crucially, no possibility of failure. It's about building the muscle of conscious change. By succeeding at these simple things, you build the mental control to become, as he says, capable of virtually anything.
Okay, so you've built some mental discipline through trance, through metamorphosis. Then the text gets into core techniques for actually doing things. Ritual, sigils, dreaming. Let's dive into sigils first. They sound like they're specifically designed to deal with that lust of result.
They absolutely are. The core idea with sigils is this. The wished-for result arises only when it has been forgotten.
Forgotten. How does that work? What is a sigil?
It's basically a symbol representing your desire. You can create it using words or pictures or even sound a mantra, but the real trick isn't making it. It's successfully losing the sigil.
Losing it? You mean like misplacing the drawing?
No. Banishing it. Banishing its form and the desire associated with it from your conscious mind. Getting it out of your everyday awareness.
How on earth do you do that?
The book suggests symbolic acts. You might burn it, bury it, flush it away, or, for a word spell, maybe repeat it over and over until it becomes meaningless noise and the original desire fades.
Okay, so you create it, embed the intent, then consciously forget it. Then what?
Then you charge it at moments of high intensity.
High intensity like?
Well, the text lists some pretty extreme examples. During magical trance, at the moment of orgasm or great elation, at times of great fear, anger, or embarrassment, or at times when intense frustration or disappointment arises. Basically, peak states.
Wow, okay. And after holding it in mind during one of those peak moments...
You banish it again, but this time by evoking laughter.
Laughter. That's unexpected.
It really is. It underscores that non-rational, almost paradoxical approach Carroll takes.
Okay, sigils. Then there's dreaming.
Right. The dream state, he says, is a convenient egress into the fields of divination, entities, and exteriorization or out-of-the-body experience. Basically, a gateway.
But he warns about something too, right? A psychic censor.
Yes. A deadly and bizarre battle with his own psychic censor, which actively tries to stop you from accessing or even remembering these deeper dream experiences.
That makes so much sense. Those dreams, were important, but they just evaporate when you wake up.
Exactly. The censor is like an inner guardian, maybe a part of your mind blocking access to stuff that might be unsettling or just too weird for the conscious self.
So how do you get past it? Does he offer techniques?
He does. For creating the astral body through dreams, he gives a very specific method. Before sleep, focus intently on the idea of seeing your hands within the dream.
Seeing your hands.
Yeah. The goal is that sudden moment of lucidity, oh, I'm dreaming, followed by your hands actually appearing clearly in the dreamscape. It's a very precise goal.
Remarkable. And from there?
The suggestion is to progress. Start trying to deliberately see specific places you know from waking life while lucid in the dream. Eventually, the idea is your double might actually be at that location.
Wow. Okay. And he also stresses banishing rituals.
Absolutely. Not just for clearing a space, but as mental discipline, too. It enables the magician to resist obsession, especially if sigils start popping back into your head or dream experiences get difficult. It grounds you.
And it protects you.
Carroll claims it protects the magician from any hostile occult influences as well. So it's both psychological hygiene and magical defense.
We've covered the practical stuff, mind training, sigils, dreams. But what's the bigger picture? The underlying reality model that Carroll thinks makes this all work. He talks about Kia, Aether, and Chaos.
Right. This is the sort of energetic blueprint he lays out. Kia is described as the core, the singular, formless basis of consciousness. It's that elusive I, your inner spark, a fragment of the great life force.
Okay, the fundamental self,
Yeah.
and the ether.
The aether surrounds the central core of the life force. It acts as the medium, the Kia thought intermediary. And crucially, it's infinitely mutable.
Mutable meaning?
Meaning almost anything can be accomplished with it. The idea is thought gives it shape and Kia gives it power.
So, the fabric of reality itself is like clay, shaped by our thoughts and powered by our consciousness.
That's very much the implication. It sounds a lot like some interpretations of quantum physics, doesn't it? Observer effect and all that.
It really does. And chaos, where does that fit in?
Well, from this etheric realm of nascent possibility, chaos gets its name. Because, as the text states, chaos cannot be known directly. It's the potential before form.
But we can influence it.
As centers of Kia, or chaos, ourselves, Carroll suggests we can sometimes call very unlikely coincidences or unexpected events into existence by manipulating the ether. He even points out that physics is starting to blunder into the etheric with things like quantum indeterminacy.
So modern science and ancient magic potentially describing the same fluid reality. Fascinating. Okay, so if the mind needs to be quiet for this to work, how do you really get there? He introduces gnosis.
Yes, gnosis is key. It's defined simply as a state where the mind is silenced and the will can act directly. Pure, unfiltered will, bypassing the noisy conscious mind.
And he gives methods for achieving this. That table of physiological gnosis.
Oh, yes. An astonishing range. He divides them into inhibitory mode and excitatory mode.
Inhibitory is like meditation.
Kind of. The main example is the death posture. Complete stillness, intense concentration, holding the body rigid.
And excitatory, that sounds different.
It is. This is where it gets really intense. The list includes sexual excitation, emotional arousal, like intense fear or anger, sleeplessness, fasting, pain, torture, even dancing, drumming, chanting.
Pain and torture. Seriously.
He lists them as methods used historically or potentially, yes. It's crucial to emphasize Carroll is describing these as ways gnosis can be achieved. He's not necessarily recommending you go out and try them, especially the extreme ones.
Right. Important distinction.
Very. He also mentions drugs can heighten effects, but warns a large dose leads to depression, confusion, and a general loss of control. The point seems to be inducing altered states, often through extreme physical or emotional means, to bypass the rational mind.
And these techniques, can you combine them?
He says they can be used sequentially, but not simultaneously, suggesting a very precise, maybe even dangerous kind of conditioning.
Okay, so once someone has this grounding in mental discipline, understands gnosis, the book goes into really specific magical practices, like evocation and invocation, working with entities.
Right. Evocation is the art of dealing with magical beings, creating them, contacting existing ones, commanding them.
Beings from where?
Well, the text notes they customarily have their origin in the mind, their thought forms initially. But, Carroll claims, they can be butted off and attached to objects and places, becoming like ghosts or spirits or vibrations.
Butted off.
Yeah.
He gives an example, right? The Ophidian method.
He does. It's quite provocative, concentrating on the attributes of an entity at the moment of orgasm and then afterward anointing something with the sexual fluids. He says it results in something rather like the deliberate creation of an obsession.
Wow. Harnessing intense physiological states again.
Exactly, using primal life force for magical creation.
And invocation is different.
Yes. Invocation is about summoning entities into yourself, not to command, but for inspiration, or to embody their qualities. He connects this to using pagan gods, for instance, as the basis for invoking some particular insight or ability.
And this is where we get some really intense examples from the book.
Yeah.
Like invoking chaos itself.
Yes, he describes an invocation of chaos, a lower aspect of the ultimate ground of existence, framed as a latter-day black mass, a deliberate blasphemy against the gods of logic and rationality.
To what end? Why do that?
To shatter conventional thought patterns, basically. Induce gnosis through overload. The description is wild. Drumming, leaping, whirling, idiotic incantations, hyperventilation for hysterical laughter, mild hallucinogens, alcohol, nitrous oxide.
Sounds completely unhinged.
Dice rolls dictating unusual behavior and sexual irregularities, discordant music, flashing lights, even burning a philosophy book by Russell on the altar. It's pure sensory and rational overload.
Good grief. And the invocation of Saturn, god of death, just as intense.
Equally rigorous, yes. Preparation involves fasting, sleeplessness, and exhaustion. Retiring to a dark chamber, musty incense, weighing the body down with lead, even a mock burial.
Mock burial.
Yes. And the cautious use of small quantities of atropine-like solanum alkaloids, basically, potentially toxic plant extracts. The focus is deep meditation on being a corpse rising from the tomb.
Aimed at confronting and transcending the fear of death.
Precisely. Accessing those deep primal states. Again, it's crucial to stress Carroll is describing these techniques from the book. They're presented as examples of extreme practice, not casual recommendations.
Understood. Definitely not for the faint of heart, or the inexperienced, as the book itself implies. Okay, beyond specific rituals, he also talks about Baphomet. What's that about?
Baphomet in Carroll's system isn't quite the historical figure. It represents the psychic field generated by the totality of living beings on this planet.
The collective unconscious, almost.
Something like that. It's depicted as that classic, hermaphroditic, horned figure with animal traits, symbolizing the spirit of the dual ecstasy, procreation and reabsorption, sex and death, the fundamental life-death cycle.
And he connects this to reptile atavisms.
Yes, those ancient primal instincts buried deep in our older brain structures, our inner sleeping dragons and wolves, as he calls them. Magic, he suggests, preserves ways to awaken and harness these atavistic forces for personal power. Kundalini, the serpent power, is another example he gives.
So tapping into the primal core for power. Given all this talk of will and power, it's maybe not surprising he addresses magical combat.
Right, and he frames it with extreme seriousness, equating it ethically to assault, the infliction of distress and disease, grievous bodily harm, and murder.
How is this supposed to work?
The power is projected, he says, from the navel area. It aims to cause disruption of the vital energies leading to disease and death.
And defenses.
Things like sentient or semi-sentient entities, anchored in talismans or amulets. He also makes an interesting observation about religious figures.
What's that?
That prolonged, obsessive religious activity can create a kind of protective, etheric thought form around them, making them hard to attack magically until they fall from favor, like a shield built of collective belief.
Fascinating. But he warns against paranoia too.
Absolutely. He states paranoia can be the worst enemy in this area. And ultimately, he concludes that constructive activities are a far greater challenge to our skills than destructive ones.
Right. Okay, so that covers a lot of the theory and practice. But one of the most illuminating parts is when Carroll shares his own experiences. It makes it feel less abstract.
Definitely. He kicks it off with a story from when he was a teenager, claiming he deliberately loosed a bolt of energy at some guy from 30 yards away.
And what happened?
He says the man jumped as if kicked violently in the backside, and for Carroll, that was his proof, his moment of thinking, there must be something to all those old witchcraft books.
Quite the starting point.
Yeah.
And later at university, he experimented with hallucinogens, expecting to find his real soul.
Yes, but that's not what he found. He said, in the innermost core of my being, there was only the power of will and the power of perception. Everything else was added on and could be stripped away.
So no fixed soul, just will and perception at the core.
Exactly. Which led to his realization that under the apparent order of matter, there was a spontaneous, creative, chaotic, magical force at work. It really reinforces that nothing is true. Identity isn't fixed. It's about will and how you perceive.
He also talks about struggling with that psychic sensor when trying astral travel, trying to see his hands in dreams.
Right. He describes it as some part of his mind being adamant that these experiences are out of bounds.
What does that tell us?
It really highlights the internal resistance you face. Even if the potential is there, there's this psychological barrier. It takes persistent, disciplined effort. It's not passive.
Then there's that really wild story, the animal atavism one.
Yeah.
After making a sigil for cat karma.
Oh, yeah, that's a strange one. He describes seeing a huge alley cat, having this moment of connection, this indescribable flash between them. And then he says, suddenly I tore off into the darkness, howling and screeching like a feline, completely possessed.
Possessed, like involuntarily tapping into that primal dragon mind.
Seems to be how he frames it. A vivid, maybe overwhelming, manifestation of those atavistic forces he deliberately invoked with the sigil. It shows the raw power he believes is accessible.
He even describes trying an exorcism on a friend with paranoid schizophrenia.
Yes, using what he called freestyle shamanism. He apparently invoked and personified the candidate's demons and essentially terrorized his friend back to normality, though he notes it was only temporary.
Wow. That's intense and blurs lines between psychology and magic quite dramatically.
It really underscores the book's view that those boundaries are more permeable than we think, and it shows Carroll's willingness to experiment, to push boundaries in a very practical, results-focused way.
And he concludes these stories by saying,
that he doesn't see these things as strange anymore. Instead, the greatest mystery to me now is why these things are not always accessible and available to us all the time.
Interesting perspective. Okay, so towards the end, Carroll zooms way out. He talks about aeonics, this grand sweep of human history through different states of consciousness.
Yeah, it's a big framework. He suggests humanity has moved through 4 major eons, or states of consciousness, and a 5th is emerging.
Starting with,
The first eon was an age of animism, shamanism, and magic. Rulers back then, he posits, had a firm grasp of the psychic forces.
and where are we now, according to him, heading into the 5th eon?
Yes. And controversially, he argues, the 5th eon is developing exactly where it might be expected, within leading sections of the foremost atheistic cultures.
Atheistic cultures, why there?
He sees it as a return to the consciousness of the first eon, but in a higher form. A reemergence of magical understanding, but without the old religious dogma, in a new context.
And he critiques current society within this framework. He draws some sharp parallels.
Oh, absolutely. He points out how medieval religions murdered millions to protect their own hegemony, and then draws a line asserting that now it is the atheist superstates supplying the arms and dropping the bombs for the hegemony of consumerism, whether capitalist or communist.
That's a very stark observation from him on how belief systems and power operate historically.
It is, and he warns that the blind logic of technology and consumerism could lead to alienation, greed, identity crises, potentially exploding into destructive conflict.
And the Illuminati. How do they fit into this vision? Not the usual conspiracy theory, right?
No, not really. He sees them more conceptually as agents of this coming 5th eon, people who might occasionally break their meditation to alter the course of history.
To do what?
To build the new eon's technologies, which he defines as the technologies of emotion, belief, magic, transmutation, and politics. Technologies aimed at freeing people from spirituality, prejudice, superstition, identity, and ideology.
Freeing them from spirituality and identity. That's radical.
It is. It's a vision of a great renaissance driven by this Chaoist philosophy that will ultimately hurl humanity to the corners of the galaxy.
A truly massive, sweeping vision. Past, present, future, all through this lens of shifting consciousness and the return of magic in a new form. Wow. Okay, this deep dive into Liber Null and Psychonaut, it has definitely pushed some boundaries on what we might think is possible, from the intense discipline of not thinking right up to these huge eonic visions and manipulating reality.
Yeah, what's really clear is Carroll's radical focus on personal experimentation, direct experience over dogma, and the profound, sometimes unsettling power he attributes to our own consciousness and will.
He's really asking us to look beyond the usual explanations, isn't he? To explore our own inner capability.
Seemingly.
So here's maybe a thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If, as this text suggests, reason is destructive of meaning when it seeks unconditional and absolute answers, what does that imply for your own search for understanding?
Interesting question.
And how might embracing this idea of conditional, flexible belief, where maybe effectiveness matters more than absolute truth, how might that open up new paths and how you perceive the world around you?
The world, as Carroll describes it anyway, seems much more fluid, much more responsive to our inner states, our focused will, than we usually imagine.
It really prompts you to consider the active role you might be playing in shaping your own experience of reality.
Yeah.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about, maybe even inspired you to explore that astonishing intersection of mind, will, and reality in some new ways.
It's certainly a challenging perspective.
It is indeed. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and stay curious.